Christopher waited for me at home and greeted with ultimatum. He asked for divorce. I always forgave him and I was never there. I calmly replied, but inwardly seething with rage. I would make him pay for that. I do not like you, so I want a divorce. Give me $800,000 and the child is yours, he said. I was astonished to hear his flippant words, although it was too late. He would now have to deal with the consequences of his decision. Anna Hotel, receptionist age, 25, so just last year, I married my previous boss at work, Christopher. This year, I left a job and realized early that I was pregnant with my partner. Everyone congratulated me as I left my warm office. Since then, I've done the boring task of cleaning and looking after our newborn. Our child cried incessantly at night and had a hard time drinking milk. All of this during our chaotic first year as parents got us to develop a bond with Christopher. Robert Enenwali Christopher has taken a drastic turn as of late. Professionals consider him an ex-post operative when it comes to cleaning and childcare, but recently he left a trace of something. He was always the one to stay at work function and would come home late night without needing dinner. I could understand if he was out on business for weeks at a time, but his coming in and out of the house like it was no big deal did not make any sense. He was one of new trend, drinking after work parties. He had never behaved in the way, not even when our kid was born. One night, after returning home from a beer party feeling unexpectedly jazzy, Christopher seemed transformed. "Welcome back," I responded. I ran upstairs and spoke to her over the baby monitor. "Is it snappy? You do not even handle alcohol well. How come you seem to be recovering today?" Watching him do better, my response seemed to incense Christopher. As I shuffled up to him, it was not the smell of booze, but a waft of women's perfume that assaulted my senses. I pointed out Christopher and said, "Usually you come home. We have a cocktail with the appetizers." The sales manager was around where I had been seated today, so stop stressing about anything, he said, concentrating on housekeeping. Those who lie often exhibit disrespect in small details, like slight hurry or subtly negative language. With the way he behaved and talked about it, just kind of a guy who seems like his. That made me think Christopher had some dark secret he was hiding. But it was odd and it scared me, his steady increase in drinking parties with more hazy walks back to our place. One particular morning, Christopher came home at an ungodly hour and went straight to work without any rest. Also, I found out that he had forgotten his phone back on the sofa. Christopher came back for it, and I hesitated whether or not to return it. When he caught me with the phone, his revulsion was clear as day. "Why the few asterisks are you all digging through my phone?" he asked. I bristled at her question and shot back. "This is a gold mine of money laying around in the street to give it back." I avoided looking inside. His angry reaction only confirmed my intuition that he had stuff on his phone that I was not supposed to see. I knew I could possibly have him at the right time, but confronting now might erase that evidence about another lady. I held my tongue. "Cool as you like." I tried not to cry. I wouldn't stoop to such a despicable act. Christopher was trying to scare me, so he used a hard tone. He slammed his suitcase against the desk and started cursing, trying to show that he was in charge. I could have gone straight immediately if I had been alone, but I had to exercise caution because of our son. For now, I would put up with it and try to find out what Christopher had done wrong. I clenched my hands, trying not to get too angry. Our son woke up and started calling out for me from the other room, sensing my sorrow. His sobs mirrored my own agony and anguish. "Shut him up already." Christopher startled me with his enraged yelling, and I recoiled at the sight of his clenched fist in a combative posture. When did our relationship start to fall apart this much? This kind of problem was unheard of when we first married. Upon closer inspection, maybe I was just oblivious to the warnings. Since the beginning of our marriage, Christopher's actions have always shown a certain aspect of himself. He had high standards for me. I had to do all the washing up, including scrubbing pots and cleaning up after every bathroom visit. I also had to make sure that the dishes were never piled up. It was my duty to clean the shoes whenever they were soiled. After we had our child, the quantity of housekeeping grew dramatically and eventually became unbearable. Christopher, who had been helpful at first, had now stopped. I frequently thought that I was cleaning the home more than a maid. My ideas of divorcing and moving out with our son grew stronger as I approached my breaking point. Then something changed. After I had just put our kid to sleep one evening, perhaps 1 month into my study into Christopher's conduct, Christopher showed me a picture. It was a picture of him having a fun-filled day with friends from my previous employment. "What are you doing leisurely outside while I'm at work?" he asked. I was simply unwinding with some tea after doing the cleaning. "What's the issue with that?" I replied. Christopher said I was squandering family money since he didn't understand what I was doing. He didn't listen to my side and began to yell. The tension in the home increased as our son, who was meant to be sleeping, started to wail loudly. "Stop talking. Put an end to that dreadful sobbing." Christopher attempted to scream at my kid, who was sobbing in the other room. I forcefully blocked my son's path in front of the entrance, determined to safeguard him. I was determined not to let him go, so I stared at Christopher. "Quit being in the way," he said. "No, I'm not moving," I answered. "Are you aware of the task at hand? You're screaming in front of a baby. That seems crazy, doesn't it?" These recent incidents seemed to have awakened my eyes. I understood that staying with Christopher would not lead to a happy future for either of us. I wanted to get out right now. All I needed to do was find a job and save up some cash because I had enough proof to leave at this point. I needed to hunt for employment covertly so Christopher wouldn't find out, since I knew I couldn't raise my baby alone just yet. While I was thinking this, Christopher aggressively opened the door, pushed me away, and talked in a chilly manner. "Leave. I don't need a lady who can't respect her husband. Now pack up your belongings and get out," he demanded. "What are you saying?" I objected. "Don't say something irrational." "Just leave," Christopher angrily said. "You look awful. You have no right to respond after taking my money and spending it any way you choose. You are no longer useful to me. Grab the child and leave," he yelled aggressively, shoving our son who was wailing and taking my possessions. We were left abandoned on the streets in the quiet back alley late at night. When he shut and latched the door behind us, all that could be heard above the silence was my son's crying. "I'm so sorry," I said to him. "I sincerely apologize for my shortcomings as a parent. I apologize for this difficulty." I ran into a neighboring park, clutching my son close to keep him warm so that I wouldn't be observed by the people. I apologized repeatedly and promised to keep him safe at all costs. I was going to get aid at the city hall or somewhere else when the light came up. It started to rain just when I thought things couldn't get much worse. I tried to protect my kid from the rain by holding him closely without using an umbrella or anything else. As the raindrops fell, so did my tears. None of this would have occurred if I had been stronger, severed my relationship with Christopher sooner, and divorced him before this child was born. I felt stuck and helpless, with a heavy burden of regret and hopelessness weighing me down. "What took place at this hour? What are you doing here?" A voice pierced my suffering. Even though it was after 3 a.m, a smart-looking old man came up to us and offered his umbrella to protect my kid and me from the rain. The opulent home in front of the park must have belonged to the unidentified old guy. He had come outside to see how we were doing, perhaps scared off by my kid's incessant crying. Even though it made me uneasy to be approached by a stranger at this hour, there was something about him that made me feel nostalgic. He covered my head with a towel and wiped my hair softly as I told him about my terrible experiences. "Please come to my home," he replied politely. "You can be looked after by female servants for the infant. Staying the night here would be too sad." I started crying nonstop at his kind words and understanding attitude. I chose to accept his offer, and with my crying son, I stepped into the house. I was about to discover a startling reality inside the elderly man's home. I was able to get a good night's sleep for the first time in a long time because of the attentive and loving attention the servants gave my son. My phone had been ringing non-stop. A female servant told me when I woke up before midday. They had shown care for my sleep by not waking me. Thankful for their generosity, I looked up my phone history and saw many messages from Christopher. Presumably unable to handle breakfast on his own, he was calling for me to come back right away. His behavior demonstrated his uselessness, and I regretted ever having dealt with him. I didn't want to go back, but I knew that ignoring him and maybe calling the cops would make things worse. I decided to take matters into my own hands, so I picked up my son and left. After I got back, Christopher and I started fighting like crazy. "Where the hell have you been?" Christopher yelled, clearly angry. "There is a mess in the house, no breakfast prepared. You obstinately remained out until morning after such a pointless fight last night. What on earth have you been up to?" Despite my wanting to respond, I bit back my sarcasm and held my tongue. "I'm right here, aren't I?" I said. The home had been shut against me, and there was no way I could have known about the absence of breakfast. If he felt bad about not being able to make breakfast for himself, he ought to have thought about the repercussions of his behavior that got me sent out. He'd made fun of me a lot, but if he really was as intelligent as he said, he would have handled things differently. I pointed out the absurdity of his circumstance rather than allowing his comments to get to me. His temples jerked with clear irritation. "I have had enough of this. I'm not able to continue with you," he said. Christopher abruptly grabbed a piece of paper from his room and banged it onto the table in the living room. It was a divorce decree with his signature and seal. He undoubtedly assumed that when I saw it, I would freak out and ask him to change his mind. I, however, was not going to provide him that satisfaction. Taking my seal and a ballpoint pen from a neighboring shelf, I signed the form without thinking twice. Christopher raised an eyebrow in astonishment and scoffed. "Aren't you unusually obedient? Even if you don't have a job, parents, or anywhere to go, how will you proceed?" His uneasiness did not match his swagger. I saw the twitching at the corner of his mouth and the cold perspiration starting to build on his forehead. I hated him inwardly and his cunning methods. I hurriedly grabbed the last of my possessions, ignoring his insults. Still seeming unconcerned, Christopher struck his last blow. "Being in your presence deprives me. Let's get a divorce. If you pay me $800,000, I'll give you the child." It was obvious that Christopher was trying to use money to control me and get me to react, attempting to subjugate and control me. His attempts to put further limitations on me and carry on with his carefree way of life while I struggled only strengthened my determination. I turned back with a knowing look on my face and said, "Is that all you wanted to say? By the end of the month, I will transfer the $800,000. Kindly take care of the formalities thereafter. Farewell." When I answered calmly and affirmatively, Christopher's face went pale and confused. He digested my offer with obvious amazement. He muttered about how impossible it would be to raise such money, but I was not going to let him rule me anymore. After the divorce was finalized, I sent him the sizable sum he had requested. I had proof of his affair, but I wanted more than money back. I wanted to make sure he was held accountable for much more. After 2 weeks, when I woke up, my phone was full of urgent calls from Christopher. Now was the time for reckoning. Christopher phoned me back, but at first I didn't pick up. Upon answering the second call, I hung up right away. I intended to make him feel uneasy and upset his equilibrium. I knew that if I responded right away, he would remain composed, and the discussion would go just how he wanted. I let him become angry on purpose, keeping him tense so he would lose his cool. My plan was bearing fruit, and I felt good about myself, like I was in charge of the circumstances. It was only when Christopher phoned back again that I answered. I responded, taking a drink of my coffee and leafing through a magazine. "You're as noisy as ever. Even if you're yelling, I can still hear you since I can change the sound level on my phone. What are your desires? You know, I'm really busy. I'm raising my son and having a nice holiday right now." My calm and easy conversation showed that I was so happy right now that my exchanges with Christopher seemed a waste of time. "You succeeded, didn't you? How did you get here?" Over the phone, Christopher's voice broke with frustration and despair. "What are you discussing?" I answered calmly. "I haven't taken any action." Christopher's passionate reaction just reinforced my presumptions. The truth was I had stolen everything from him: his family, his work, his money, and his wife. I had torn everything from him. "No one but you could have accomplished this. You liar, give me everything back." He was screaming and crying dramatically, and I was laughing so hard inside. "Would you mind telling me what I did?" I pretended not to know. I seem to have forgotten a lot lately. I proceeded to sip my coffee and thumb through a magazine while maintaining a barely heard voice. Christopher got married again not long after our split. The lady with whom he had an affair during our marriage was now his wife. She was the daughter of the president of a significant firm. Christopher had kept his first marriage a secret from her, and she became enraged upon learning about our kid. She was pregnant the day he proposed our divorce. Given that her father was a crucial collaborator on the largest deal among his clientele, Christopher had to tie the knot as soon as possible. To swiftly remarry her, he put pressure on me to complete the divorce. However, this was only the start of his demise. Christopher was booted out of his house and got divorced today by his new wife. His prior marriage was made public, and when our child's identity was revealed, she demanded a divorce and monetary damages. His in-laws had to step in because of his increasingly disruptive conduct and furious outbursts. He was let go from the hotel when the issue got out of hand, to the point that his employer was informed. The business selected the client over him. He lost his job along with his wife. Furthermore, Christopher was left financially devastated since he had to pay damages and compensation for all the $800,000 he had gotten from me. He had to spend all of his funds because the sum was not enough to offset the losses. Why? Why is she aware of my prior marriage? Christopher was obviously desperate. "You are the only one who could have accomplished this. You have stolen my joy." I shut the magazine and made the decision to speak with him. It enraged me that he had no regrets. All the same, he continued to deny that his circumstances were caused by his own acts. "Everything that happens is karma for your actions. You caused this to happen to you," I firmly stated. "Cheating while you were with me, abusing your wife, getting divorced, and losing your job. All of these are the results of your own bad actions. How absurd is that? Do you dare to preach to me? Even if you are from a lower social class than me, you have to be in a position where you are unable to even support a child on your own. Isn't it the reason you lead such a hectic life? You had to be getting this as payback for leaving me." Christopher misunderstood, thinking that I worked from sunrise to sunset. Raising the magazine in front of me, I made fun of him behind my back. "Do you refer to this as busy?" I finished reading the beauty magazine that I had been occupied with up until now. My plan is to sip on my second cup of tea and perhaps engage in some knitting. Is that busy? I could feel his fury. "Are you still making fun of me on the phone?" His face was practically red as an octopus after boiling, as I could almost see. I was laughing so hard I could not contain my delight, and appeared to annoy him even more. He would not stop screaming, yet I found his screams beautiful. "How are you doing?" "There's no way to resolve this over the phone," he vowed. "I'm coming to your house right now." "You're welcome to come, but you'll be denied entry," I shot back. "I'll tell the servants that you're an outsider and will not be let in at all." "Servants?" "Yes, it is correct. I currently share a mansion with my father." I surprised him by showing him my father, the chairman of his workplace, and the old man who had assisted me during a video call. "Hey, Christopher, is this our initial encounter?" my father said with composure. Christopher seemed noticeably shaken. "Father, how does this signify?" he stumbled. Though I couldn't see Christopher's face, I could imagine how confused he must be. Christopher's presumption started to falter once he was informed that I didn't have a father. Actually, my mother and I were divorced when she was expecting me. The relationship between my mother and father went against what society expected. My mother was a regular citizen while my father was the heir to a financial giant. The entire family was against my father's marriage to my mother, and my grandma did not support it. Dad had been abandoned, cut off from everyone, and no matter how hard he tried, he could never have the marriage sanctioned. After observing this, my mother suggested they split up, providing me with legal recognition with his approval. They did not permit the marriage, but they did give monthly child support because they did not want the conglomerate's reputation to be damaged. It has been a while since your mother died. I was told that she didn't exist in this world. Even though I genuinely wanted to meet her, it would have been excessively harsh to inform a small child her father was absent. Your mother requested me to take care of you when she died last year, and I have been keeping an eye on you from the shadows. I was actually astonished to find Anna standing outside the home, wet to the bone. Even though I knew you got married since I had heard about it at the firm, my father said. That day, were you under the chairman's care? Yes, I answered. When the rain got to us, my father came to our aid. My father put his hand softly on my back and comforted me while I gave Christopher a menacing look. You did say I had no financial standing, correct? How unfortunate. My father's business is now in my ownership, and its entire asset worth is $13 billion. I'm not a closed-minded person who gets worked up over $800,000. That is the entire narrative. I wasn't alarmed by the enormous $800,000 that day because my father had offered it to us after lending a hand. The woman in the picture is my acquainted daughter. I'll ask the other partner to file for an immediate divorce after explaining the circumstances. They have to be kind individuals. I will get all of the money back for you, so don't worry about it. Anna, put our child and yourself first. He is the priceless heirloom your mother departed with. I promise not to let you feel sad. After hearing my father's comments, I immediately agreed to Christopher's divorce and sent the agreed-upon payment. We'd been playing with Christopher all along, and now at last he appeared to recognize how stupid he was. It's ridiculous that you believe you're intelligent, I snorted. He didn't say anything, looked cornered, and seemed dejected. Perhaps he just recognized that giving up was his only option. And so our bitter argument with him came to an end, and Christopher never bothered us again. After a few years, my kids started primary school. I lived a happy life at work and in private, surrounded by my father and my kid. We were also well treated by the personnel, and I at last experienced the warmth of a family.
I've always loved San Francisco. There's something about this city that feels like it's constantly alive, bustling with possibilities and hidden stories. I'm Maya, a 30-year-old graphic designer, and my life here has been a blend of work, quiet moments, and unexpected turns. I live alone in a chic, modern apartment that I'm proud to call my own. It's not huge, but it's perfect for me. The best part is its location, just a short walk from the design firm where I spend most of my days. My job is my passion. I dive into my work with an intensity that often surprises me. Each project feels like a new adventure, a chance to create something unique and meaningful. On weekends, when I need to escape the buzz of the city, I head to a small park nearby. It's my sanctuary. The park isn't anything extraordinary, just a patch of green amid the concrete, but it's where I find peace. The tall trees and chirping birds offer a kind of quiet that's hard to find elsewhere in the city. It's here that I find solace and inspiration, a place where I can think and recharge. One crisp autumn afternoon, while I was enjoying the usual tranquility of the park, everything changed. I was lost in thought, sketching ideas for a new project, when a sudden commotion jolted me out of my reverie. I looked up to see a man sprawled on the grass, looking a bit disoriented. "Are you all right?" I asked, rushing over to him. The man, who looked to be in his mid-30s, blinked up at me. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just tripped over my own feet," he said with a sheepish grin. His name was Jake, and as it turned out, he worked in real estate. Jake had a charisma about him that was hard to ignore. His outgoing personality contrasted sharply with my more reserved nature. Over the next few weeks, we kept running into each other in the park. What started as casual conversations soon blossomed into something more. We went from chatting about the weather to sharing stories over coffee. Our weekends began to revolve around each other, and before long, our time together extended into late-night dinners and even full weekends spent exploring the city. Our relationship progressed quickly. It felt natural and exciting, but also a bit overwhelming. One day, Jake proposed that we move in together. I was caught off guard. The idea of merging my life with someone else's was daunting, but I couldn't deny how much I cared for him. After some thought, I agreed. We found a larger apartment in a new part of the city, one with bright rooms and an airy feel that symbolized a fresh start for us. Moving in together was supposed to be a new beginning, but soon I noticed cracks in our seemingly perfect life. It started subtly. Jake suggested that I should cut back on my work hours to focus more on our home and our relationship. At first, I thought he was joking, but as he continued to press the issue, I realized he was serious. I was taken aback. My work meant everything to me. It wasn't just a job, it was a big part of who I was. The thought of stepping back from my career felt like losing a piece of myself. I tried to balance both, but the tension was palpable. The situation was further complicated by Jake's mother, Mrs. Harrison, who lived nearby. She visited often, and her presence added another layer of stress to our relationship. Mrs. Harrison, a woman in her early 60s, was kind but had strong traditional views about gender roles. Her comments about homemaking and prioritizing family over work made me feel as though my career was being dismissed as insignificant. Jake seemed to align with his mother's views more and more, and the strain began to show. Despite the growing pressure, I tried to stay optimistic. I found myself constantly juggling between fulfilling my work responsibilities and trying to meet the expectations set by Jake and his mother. It was like walking a tightrope, and I felt like I was about to fall off. One night, after a particularly long day at work, I sat in our new apartment feeling overwhelmed. I realized that I was losing sight of myself. My independence, which had always been my strength, was slipping away. It was in this moment of clarity that I decided I needed to do something to preserve my sense of self while navigating this new, challenging phase of my life. And so began a silent act of rebellion. I made a decision to pretend that I had quit my job while continuing to work from home. I set up a separate savings account to stash away money for my freelance projects. It was a way to reclaim a part of my life, a small, private rebellion against the pressure I was feeling. Little did I know, this decision would set the stage for a confrontation that would change everything. I thought moving in with Jake would be a new adventure, a chance to build something meaningful together. But as the weeks turned into months, the excitement of our new apartment began to wear off, revealing underlying issues we hadn't fully addressed. Jake's suggestions about my career continued. He would casually bring up the idea of me reducing my work hours, always framing it as a way to enhance our relationship. "It would be nice if you could be around more," he'd say, his voice filled with genuine concern. "We could use more time together. Maybe even work on making our place feel more like home." At first, I tried to brush it off. I thought maybe it was just a phase. But the more he brought it up, the more I felt like my independence was being chipped away. Balancing my job with the demands of our relationship was becoming increasingly difficult. I loved Jake, but I loved my work too. It was a core part of who I was. Things took a turn for the worse when Jake's mother, Mrs. Harrison, started visiting more frequently. Her visits were always polite, but they carried an underlying tension. Mrs. Harrison had her own ideas about how a woman should prioritize her life, and it seemed her opinions were influencing Jake more than I realized. One day, as I was preparing dinner, Mrs. Harrison stopped by unexpectedly. She looked around the kitchen and made a comment that stung. "It's important to make a home feel warm and inviting. You know, keeping things organized and spending time on it can really make a difference," she said, her tone casual but her words heavy with implication. I smiled tightly, trying to keep my composure. "I agree, Mrs. Harrison. I've been working on making it a comfortable place for us." "Oh, I'm sure you're doing your best," she replied, but there was a note of disapproval in her voice. "Sometimes, though, it's better to focus more on creating a nurturing environment at home rather than being too engrossed in work." The conversation left me feeling frustrated and trapped. Jake and I had never discussed this level of interference from his mother, and it seemed like he was aligning with her traditional views more and more. I began to feel like an outsider in my own home. I tried to adapt. I cut back on some work hours and focused more on the house, but it felt like a part of me was shrinking. Despite my efforts, the strain between us grew. Jake would often bring up how my work was keeping me away from our relationship. "You're always busy, Maya. Can't you take a break?" he'd say. The final straw came one evening when we had a particularly heated argument. Jake was frustrated, and his irritation bubbled over. "You don't support me or our future," he yelled. "You're always prioritizing your job over us. This isn't what I envisioned for us." I was devastated. I felt like I was being pulled in two different directions, torn between my love for Jake and my passion for my career. It seemed like nothing I did was ever enough. The pressure was relentless, and I was running out of ways to keep everything balanced. In a desperate bid to retain some control over my life, I decided to take a drastic step. I began to pretend that I had quit my job. Behind closed doors, I continued to work on freelance projects, setting up a separate savings account to stash away the money I earned. It was a secret rebellion, a way to keep a piece of my independence while trying to meet the expectations placed on me. Even though this plan provided me with a small sense of control, it added another layer of stress. Keeping up the pretense was exhausting. I had to be careful about when and how I worked, always making sure not to slip up. The emotional toll was immense, and it was becoming harder to maintain the facade. Jake's growing frustration was becoming more apparent. The tension between us reached a breaking point during one of his drunken outbursts. He accused me of undermining his vision for our future, insisting that I conform to his and his mother's expectations. It was a painful confrontation that left me questioning whether this relationship was worth the cost to my own well-being. I started to realize that no matter how much I tried to please everyone, I was losing myself in the process. The facade of harmony was cracking, and beneath it lay the painful truth that something had to change. I had to make a choice, one that would require me to confront the reality of my situation and decide what I truly wanted for my future. The atmosphere at home was growing more oppressive. Every day, it felt like I was walking on eggshells, trying to keep up the pretense of quitting my job while secretly working from home. The strain was taking its toll on me, and Jake's frustrations were becoming more frequent and intense. One evening, Jake came home late, his mood sour and his words sharp. He had been drinking, and it was clear that he was more than just tipsy. I could see the frustration in his eyes as he staggered into the living room. "Why are you still working?" he demanded, his voice slurring slightly. "I thought you were going to focus on our life together." I tried to stay calm. "I'm not working. I've told you, I'm focusing on us. I'm just tidying up some things." "Don't lie to me, Maya." His voice rose, and I could see the anger boiling over. "You're always working, always busy. What's the point of this if you can't even commit to us?" I was taken aback by his accusation. "I'm doing everything I can.
But this isn't just about me.
It's about us. I'm trying to balance both, but it's not easy." Jake's face flushed with rage. "Balance? It feels like you're always putting your work first. You're not supporting me or our relationship. You've changed, Maya." The words hit me hard. They were a reminder of everything that was wrong, of the constant pressure I felt to give up a part of myself for the sake of our relationship. But it wasn't just Jake's anger. It was his growing alignment with his mother's views that was causing the real conflict. His mother, Mrs. Harrison, had been visiting more often, her comments becoming sharper and more pointed. One day, while Jake was at work, she came by to discuss the progress of our new life together. She looked around the apartment with a critical eye, her disapproval evident. "You know," she said, "a woman's role is important in a home. It's about creating a warm and welcoming space. I hope you're not letting your work interfere with that." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my emotions in check. "I'm doing my best to balance everything, Mrs. Harrison." She nodded, but there was a hint of satisfaction in her eyes. "Well, it's important to make sure that your priorities are in the right place. A home needs a woman's touch." The pressure from Jake and his mother was relentless. It felt like I was being squeezed from all sides, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't meet their expectations without losing myself in the process. I was caught in a cycle of pretending and compromising, and it was beginning to break me down. The final confrontation came one night after a particularly intense argument. Jake was drunk again, his emotions raw and unfiltered. We were in the middle of a heated exchange when he suddenly shouted, "If you can't support me and our future, then what are we even doing here? I can't keep living like this." His words were like a knife to my heart. I felt a deep, crushing sense of realization. I couldn't keep living under this pressure. The constant struggle to maintain a facade, the relentless push to conform to someone else's expectations, it was all too much. In the heat of the moment, I made a decision that would change everything. "Maybe you're right," I said, my voice trembling. "Maybe this isn't working. I can't keep living like this." Jake's face showed a mixture of anger and disbelief. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" I nodded, feeling tears well up. "I can't do this anymore. I need to find a way to be true to myself. I'm sorry, but I need to leave." The look on Jake's face was a mix of shock and fury. "You're just going to walk away?" "I'm not walking away from you," I said, my voice firm despite the tears. "I'm walking away from a life that's making me lose myself." That night, I packed a few bags with the essentials and made arrangements to stay with a friend. The decision wasn't easy, and it felt like I was tearing a piece of my heart away. But deep down, I knew it was the only way I could reclaim my independence and start rebuilding my life on my own terms. As I walked out of the apartment, I felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness. The life I had tried so hard to build was unraveling, but in its place, I was beginning to see a glimmer of hope. I had taken the first step toward finding myself again, even if it meant facing an uncertain future. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of emotions. I settled into a small apartment of my own, a cozy space that felt like a blank canvas for a new beginning. I returned to my graphic design work, and my colleagues welcomed me back with open arms. Their support was a balm to my soul, and it reminded me of why I had chosen this path in the first place. I threw myself back into my career with renewed passion. My work became a source of joy and empowerment. It was a relief to focus solely on projects that mattered to me, without the constant pressure to prioritize someone else's expectations. I started to explore new hobbies, painting, hiking, and even cooking, which had always been on the back burner. It felt exhilarating to rediscover parts of myself that had been overshadowed by my previous relationship. One day, while I was at a coffee shop, I ran into old friends. It was wonderful to reconnect with them and share stories about our lives. They were genuinely happy to see me and were curious about my new beginnings. It felt good to share my journey and receive their encouragement. It was a reminder that I had not only lost myself in the past relationship but also gained a new sense of clarity and purpose. Months later, Jake reached out to me. I was surprised to receive a message from him, especially since I had not heard from him since moving out. He was candid about his struggles, including losing his job and feeling lost without me. He expressed a desire to talk and possibly rekindle our relationship. I was tempted to meet with him, to see if there was any way to find closure or understanding. However, after reflecting on everything I had been through, I realized that my life had taken a new direction. I had found a stronger sense of self-worth and clarity about what I wanted. The idea of going back to a relationship that had caused me so much pain seemed like a step backward. When we finally met, Jake was visibly different. He seemed older, more worn out, and his demeanor was one of regret. He apologized for how he had treated me and admitted that he had made mistakes. But as we talked, I knew deep down that the relationship we had was not something I wanted to revisit. "I've changed a lot," Jake said, his voice filled with remorse. "I realize now how much I took you for granted. I'm sorry for everything." I took a deep breath, feeling a mix of sadness and relief. "I appreciate your apology, Jake, but I've grown a lot since we parted ways. I'm in a different place now, and I need to keep moving forward." He nodded, understanding my decision. "I get it, Maya. I hope you find the happiness you're looking for." As I walked away from that meeting, I felt a profound sense of closure. I was finally free from the shadows of my past, ready to embrace the future with confidence. I had reclaimed my independence and learned to value myself in ways I hadn't before. My journey of self-discovery had been challenging, but it had led me to a place of personal fulfillment and happiness. The story of my life had come full circle, and I was ready to write the next chapter with a heart full of hope and a mind clear about what truly mattered to me.
You have to stay home while we go on our family trip because it's more fun without anyone else there, my mother-in-law said happily on the phone. I might bring you back a souvenir if I remember. I was supposed to go on this trip with my in-laws and my husband, but now they were leaving me behind. Ever since I married her son, my mother-in-law, who really loves him, never misses a chance to say something mean or bother me. Staying home might be a problem, I said back, but my mother-in-law just laughed like she was making fun of me. Is it a problem for you? Just think of it as punishment for not doing what I say. Then she hung up. It's not a problem for me, it's a problem for you guys, right? My name is Jessica, and I'm 30 years old. I do housework and work part-time at the local supermarket. It's been 3 years since I married my husband Mike, who used to work with me. Even though we worked in different parts of the company, we talked a lot before we started dating. What really brought Mike and me closer together was a party at the end of the year at our office. It was a big gathering with people from different departments. Luckily, I ended up sitting next to Mike. Since we were already friends, we talked easily. At one point, Mikey had to leave for the restroom, and I was left alone. That's when a boss from another department, who had been drinking a lot, started bothering me, trying to get me to drink more. I didn't know what to do because he was a boss I didn't know well. Just when I was feeling uncomfortable, Mike came back. He saw what was happening and calmly took the boss away to another table. When Mike came back to our table, he asked if I was okay, and joked about how the boss couldn't handle his alcohol. That's when I started seeing Mike in a new way, and I confessed that I had feelings for him. That's how our relationship started. Things went smoothly from there, and we got married 3 years ago. Even though we don't have kids yet, our marriage is strong and happy. Even though Mike and I are happily married, there's one big problem, my mother-in-law, who we're currently living with. When we first got married, we had our own apartment, but there was a fire in the building next to ours, and our place got flooded with water from the firefighting efforts. We had to leave because our apartment wasn't safe to live in anymore. We didn't know where to go, but Mike's mom offered for us to stay with them. We were thankful for the help and moved in with them. But things got difficult after we moved in. My mother-in-law, who already made mean comments sometimes because she loves Mike a lot, started nagging me more often. One weekend, for example, I had finished all the chores and was relaxing with a cup of coffee in the living room when my mother-in-law came home. She started bustling around the house. Then she came up to me and said, "Jessica, you're not cleaning properly. You need to spend more time on it and be thankful for your hard-working husband. As his wife, it's your job to support him. I can't believe you can't even do that much. If you're not happy, then you should leave right now." Honestly, I felt frustrated, thinking here we go again. My mother-in-law constantly criticized me, and it seemed like it happened almost every day. I figured the only reason she agreed to let us stay with them was because she wanted to be close to her son, Mike, again. My presence as his wife probably just annoyed her. "Mom, please don't be so hard on Jessica," Mike stepped in. "But there's some truth to what you're saying. Even though she works part-time, she shouldn't slack off on chores." Mike often took his mom's side, which sometimes made me wish he'd support me more as his wife. I never meant to neglect the housework. Even though I work 4 days a week, I always make sure to take care of our home and family of 4, even when I'm not feeling well. On the other hand, my mother-in-law, who's a homemaker, spends most of her time going out and having fun. Since we live in her house, I couldn't complain openly. I just tried to be patient in this uncomfortable situation. Then one day, something unexpected happened. Mike suggested that we go on a trip, just the two of us. Why don't we go to a spa resort next month? The busy season at work is over, and I need to use up some of my annual leave, he said. I thought it would be nice for us to relax somewhere. A spa sounds amazing. I haven't scheduled any work shifts for next month yet, so I can take time off, I told Mike. After talking it over, we decided to go on a 2-day spa trip in the middle of next month. Since we planned to go during the week, we expected to have a peaceful and unhurried time together. I was thrilled about the trip and couldn't contain my excitement. Whenever I had a moment, I found myself researching our destination. Just as I was getting ready to book our stay, my mother-in-law said something surprising. Jessica, I heard you and Mike are going on a trip. Why didn't he tell me? She asked. Well, I stuttered, worried about how she might react. Then she said exactly what I feared she would. Next month is my husband's and my anniversary. I was thinking of celebrating with a family trip. A fancy hotel would be nice. I really didn't want to go on a trip with my mother-in-law. Mike and I were planning on going by ourselves this time. How about we all go together next time? I suggested, hoping to compromise. But my mother-in-law wasn't having it. It won't be the same if it's not this time. It's our anniversary celebration, she insisted. Just as I was about to respond, Mike walked in from work. Welcome home, Mike. We were just talking about the trip, my mother-in-law said enthusiastically. Oh, I'm excited, Mike said, seeming to agree with his mom. I wondered how she found out about the trip, but it seemed like Mike might have told her. Mike noticed my look and seemed a bit uneasy. Mom's really excited, so let's postpone our trip for another time. It'll be more fun if we all go together, Mike suggested, with Mike and his dad agreeing. I couldn't refuse going on the trip with all of us. Okay, next time it'll just be us, I promise, Mike said, looking relieved when I reluctantly agreed. Even though I wasn't happy about how the trip turned out, there wasn't much I could do about it now. At least I decided I'd be the one to pick the places we visit and the food we try, so I took charge of booking hotels and planning our sightseeing. Then came the day of the trip. I had packed everything the day before, so the plan was to wake up an hour before leaving, enjoy breakfast, and then head out. When my alarm went off, I stretched and called out for Mike, noticing he wasn't beside me. Then it hit me, he wasn't anywhere in the house. Could it be? I dialed my cell phone, but there was no answer. When I called my mother-in-law's phone, she picked up right away. Oh, Jessica dear, what's up? Mike can't talk right now because he's driving, she said casually. Where are you guys? I asked, feeling a sinking sensation. My mother-in-law responded casually. Isn't it obvious? We're on a family vacation. It wouldn't be a proper family trip with an outsider like you, so you'll have to stay home. Maybe we'll bring you back a souvenir if we remember. Remember? I could hear the triumph in her voice. Stay at home? That's going to be a problem, I told my mother-in-law. But she just laughed mockingly. Oh, is it a problem for you? Just see it as punishment for not doing what I say, she said, then hung up abruptly. I covered my face with my hands and shook my shoulders, but instead of crying, I burst out laughing. Well, they better enjoy their trip. They'll regret leaving me behind, I thought. I quickly went online and booked a nice hotel in the tourist spot we were supposed to visit today. Then I made a reservation at a restaurant where I could enjoy a delicious dinner just for myself. After quickly getting ready and having breakfast, I felt ready to have some fun. All right, time for a good time, I said to myself as I grabbed my luggage and hopped on the train. I had done a lot of research on different tourist spots, and I was determined to have a vacation. It's a small tourist spot, so I might bump into Mike and my in-laws, but I don't care. They're the ones who messed up, I thought, as the train approached our destination. From now on, I'm going to forget about my mother-in-law and Mike and just enjoy myself, I decided as I stepped off the train. I visited a cute boutique, had tea at a trendy cafe, and chatted with locals, thoroughly enjoying my solo adventure. As the day turned into night, it was time to check into the hotel. I had booked one of the top luxury hotels in the area. I felt like I needed to do something drastic like this to rejuvenate myself. As I walked towards the hotel's check-in counter, I heard a woman's voice causing a scene. "Why can't we stay here? We're willing to pay," she exclaimed. When I looked closer, I realized it was my mother-in-law causing the disturbance. Of course they wouldn't be allowed to stay there because this wasn't the hotel I had booked for the four of us. From a safe distance, I saw Meek spotting me and calling out, "Hey Jessica, what's going on? We couldn't stay at the hotel you booked, so we have to find another one. But they're full," he explained, looking a bit angry, followed by my furious mother-in-law. "Well, that's what happens when the person who booked the hotel isn't here to check in. It's a security rule. I did warn you," I said calmly. At that moment, they seemed to realize their mistake and exchange surprised glances. Just as they were about to cause more trouble, hotel staff rushed over. It was quite funny to watch my mother-in-law being escorted out of the hotel gently but firmly by the staff. "Remember this, we will stay in a place far more luxurious than this hotel," my mother-in-law exclaimed before she and Mike left. Feeling somewhat relieved, I proceeded with my check-in. Once I completed the check-in process, I was shown to my room. The clean and luxurious decor made me feel like I was in a dream. After settling my luggage, I decided to explore the hotel. After wandering around for a bit, I returned to the lobby. More guests were arriving. I sat on the sofa and zoned it out for a while. When two young women sat down next to me, they seemed excited, chatting about their impressions of the hotel. Their conversation quickly turned interesting. "Hey, did you hear about that hotel near the station? There's a really creepy rumor about it. They say if you stay in a second-floor room, you start hearing things that aren't there, and your stuff gets stolen. And even worse, there was a case where someone died and nobody knows who did it," one of them said. "We're so lucky we're staying here, right? Do you think it's true? But why hasn't anyone been arrested? I mean, wouldn't they call the police if something like that happened?" the other asked. "Well, there are rumors that even the hotel staff might be involved." "It's so scary, what a dangerous place," the first one replied. When I checked the time, I realized it was almost time for my dinner reservation. I quickly got up and hurried to the restaurant. The meal was so satisfying. After dinner I returned to the hotel, took a relaxing bath, changed into my pajamas, and settled in to watch TV. That's when my phone rang. "Hello, we found a hotel to stay in, and it's really nice. It's a shame you're not here with us, but don't worry, we'll enjoy it twice as much for you," my mother-in-law said cheerfully. "Oh, is that so? Well, you're lucky to find a place at the last minute," I replied casually. "Isn't it? It's quiet and relaxing here because there aren't many other guests around, plus it's so close to the tourist spot, and the hotel is gorgeous." "I wonder why that is," my mother-in-law went on. That's when it hit me. Could it be the hotel near the station? "Yes, that's the one." "Why do you ask?" she responded. I remembered the unsettling story I had heard about the hotel's bad reputation in the lobby before dinner. "I think you should leave," I warned my mother-in-law, but she just laughed off my concern. "Are you jealous that we found a nice place to stay? Well then, too bad for you. Bye." Once again my mother-in-law and Ed the call without giving me a chance to respond. I didn't bother calling her back. I had given my advice and that was enough. I switched off my phone. I didn't want my relaxation to be interrupted any further. I spent the rest of the evening leisurely and drifted off into a peaceful sleep. The next day, after checking out of the hotel, I visited the tourist spots I had missed the day before. I returned home as the sun was setting, feeling content. As I approached the house, I noticed light leak out from the windows indicating that the three of them had already returned home. "I'm back," I announced my arrival in my usual tone as I opened the door. As I entered the living room, all three of them started talking at once, creating a commotion. I was taken aback but managed to calm them down. Then my mother-in-law began recounting the incident from the previous night. After they had all gone to bed, they heard sounds of wrestling and someone entering the room. Paralyzed with fear, my mother-in-law stayed in bed quietly while the intruders seemed to roam around the room for about 10 minutes before leaving without a sound. Feeling relieved, my mother-in-law eventually fell back asleep only to wake up the next morning to find that all their belongings, including wallets and smartphones that were left on the desk, were gone. The only things left were the coin pouch and key holder that Mike had kept in his jacket's inside pocket. In a panic, they rushed to inform the hotel staff only to be told, "You still need to pay for the room." Shockingly, the hotel staff didn't even call the police. Feeling helpless, the troubled trio used a coins mic to make a call from a public phone to a nearby relative, pleading for help. Luckily, the relatives arrived swiftly, covering the hotel charges and arranging for their safe return home. They promised to report the incident to the police soon. However, their frustration turned towards me. "If only you had warned us more seriously to leave, we wouldn't have ended up in this mess," my mother-in-law scolded. "That's right, Jessica, you bear some responsibility for this incident. What are you going to do about it?" Mike added, joining in with his mother's scolding. "But if my in-laws hadn't left me behind to go on a trip, none of this would have happened in the first place." "I did warn you then," I responded honestly. Mike's face went pale. "Shut up, you're just the wife. Don't get cheeky. We're getting a divorce. I can't put up with you anymore," he declared firmly. I was stunned into silence. I quietly went to our bedroom, retrieved something from the cabinet, and returned to the living room to show it to Mike. "Divorce? Fine by me. I don't need a husband who won't stand up for his mistreated wife," I declared firmly. Mike's face went pale. What I had brought out were the divorce papers I had asked a lawyer to prepare. I had been getting ready for this possibility. "Maybe we should take some time to think about it," Mike stammered. But my mother-in-law saw an opportunity to push Mike towards the divorce. "You should just get rid of such a terrible wife now. Your mom will find you someone better," he urged. Unable to go against his mother's wishes, Mike eventually agreed to the divorce. "Well then, goodbye. Please enjoy your life with your beloved family," he said, breaking down. Ignoring Mike's emotional state, I left the house. Later, through my lawyer, I submitted the divorce papers, and the divorce was finalized despite Mike's attempts to reconcile. I ignored them all. Meanwhile, my mother-in-law, who had succeeded in getting rid of me, seemed happy for a while. But her joy didn't last long. The news of the divorce and the end of their living together spread throughout the neighborhood. And people who enjoyed gossiping quickly connected it to my mother-in-law's mistreatment of me. Revealing her unpleasant nature, she began to face judgmental stares from those around her, and it seemed that finding a new wife for Mike was no longer a priority. I returned to my hometown and was able to find a new job thanks to a friend's recommendation. After everything I've been through, I have my fill of marriage for now. I plan to enjoy being single for a while.
Life's funny, you know? You start off with a heart full of dreams and a head full of plans. thinking you've got it all figured out. That was me, Jane, and my husband Alex when we first tied the knot. We were like two peas in a pod, living in this cozy house I got from my granny, with our little bundle of joy, Lily lighting up our world. Back then, Alex had just opened up his bakery. It was small, but it was his pride and joy. I was climbing the ladder at the company, crunching numbers as an economist. We were a team dreaming big dreams about big houses and college funds for Lily, and maybe a sibling or two down the line. But as the months rolled by, something shifted. The bakery remained small, barely scraping by. I tried talking to Alex about maybe expanding or trying something new to boost business. Alex, babe, have you thought about maybe offering catering services? Or what about those pastry classes you always wanted to run? I'd suggest, trying to keep the conversation light and positive. He just waved me off, his forehead creasing in annoyance. Jane, I know what I'm doing, okay? We're fine as we are, he'd say, but we weren't fine. Not really. I started taking on more hours at work, trying to make up for the shortfall. It was around then that things with Alex's mom got tense too. She'd call out of the blue, laying into me about how I wasn't supporting Alex enough. Listen here, Jane, she'd hiss over the phone. My son doesn't need your charity. He's doing just fine without your meddling. I was taken aback, to say the least. Mrs. Thompson, I'm just trying to help. We're family, aren't we? And besides, I'm not exactly sitting on a pile of cash here. I'm working hard for everything we have, I'd explain. Lately, things have been going south for Alex's bakery, like a ship hitting one iceberg after another. First, he had to let go of half the staff, which was tough. Those were people we knew, people who relied on that paycheck. Then he had to cut down on production, saying there wasn't enough demand to keep things running like before. It broke my heart to see him so defeated, but I wasn't about to sit back and watch our dreams crumble to dust. One evening, I sat down with him, trying to keep the conversation as light as possible. Alex, love, have you thought about maybe bringing someone in, a consultant or something, to look at what's going wrong and help us fix it? He barely looked up from his plate, his fork playing with his food more than anything. Jane, we've been over this. I don't need some outsider telling me how to run my bakery, he'd say. But it could help, don't you think? Maybe there's something we're missing. We could even consider a loan, just to tide things over and invest in a bit of a revamp. That got his attention. His head snapped up, his eyes narrowing. A loan? Are you out of your mind? We're already hanging by a thread, Jane, and now you want us to drown in debt? I tried to keep my voice calm, even though frustration was bubbling inside me. It's not drowning if it helps us swim, Alex. I'm just trying to find a way to help us get through this, I'd say. But he slammed his fork down, pushing away from the table. No, Jane, just no, he'd say, storming out, leaving me sitting there, staring at his uneaten dinner. A few months passed, and the bakery's front door had a new sign hanging on it. Closed until further notice. It was like a punch to the gut every time I walked past it. Inside our home, the air was thick with unspoken words and frustration. Alex had retreated into himself, spending days on end flipping through job listings with a scowl, his pride bruised and battered. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, I found Alex slumped on the couch, the glow of the TV casting shadows across his face. Alex, we need to talk about you finding a job, I started, trying to keep my voice steady and calm. He didn't even look up. I'm looking, Jane. Looking, he'd say, but looking or scrolling through social media wasn't bringing in income. Not just whatever this is. I couldn't help but let a bit of sarcasm slip. Finally, he looked at me, his face set in a stubborn line. I told you, I'm not settling for some entry-level crap. I have a degree, Jane. I was a businessman. I'm not going to be someone's lackey, Alex snapped back. Your business failed, Alex, I reminded him, a little more harshly than I intended. We can't afford your pride right now. We need practical solutions, real income. That set him off. So what? You think I'm just a failure? Is that it? You don't think I can make it back to the top? It's not about what I think. I tried to reason. It's about reality. We have bills, a daughter to think about. He didn't let me finish. Forget it, Jane. You wouldn't understand. You're just like everyone else, trying to keep me down. The argument spiraled from there. Harsh words thrown back and forth until he stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Not long after that mess, his mother called. As soon as I heard her voice, I braced myself. Jane, you need to do something about getting Alex a job at your place. A good one, she demanded, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. Mrs. Thompson, it doesn't work like that, I started, feeling the frustration building. They don't just hand out high positions based on a request, especially not to someone with no experience in the field. She huffed. You need to support your husband more, Jane. He's got potential. You're just holding him back. The conversation went in circles, her accusing me of not doing enough, of not caring enough, while I tried to explain the reality of our situation. It ended with her hanging up on me, leaving me feeling even more isolated and frustrated. And so, days turned into weeks with Alex barely lifting a finger around the house, consumed with his phone or the TV, leaving me to juggle work, household chores, and taking care of Lily. Every attempt to talk to him about responsibilities, about being a part of this family, was met with defensiveness or outright avoidance. Can you at least pick up Lily from school today? I asked one morning, hoping for a small win. I'm busy, Jane, was his dismissive reply, not even specifying what he was busy with. Doing what, Alex? What's so important that you can't help with your daughter? I pressed, but he just shrugged. Just stuff you wouldn't get, he said, wrapped up in his own world. That's how it was now, him wrapped up in his world of whatever, me trying to keep everything else from falling apart. Every conversation a battle, every day a little harder than the last. Things between Alex and me hadn't been great, but I never expected to find out he was taking cash right out of my purse. It started small, a $20 here, a $50 there. I thought I was being forgetful at first, until one day the missing amounts were too big to ignore. I waited for Alex to come home, tapping my foot, my arms crossed. The minute he walked through the door, I was on him like a hawk. Alex, we need to talk. Now, I said, my voice sharp. The cash from my purse. It's been going missing, and I want to know why, I demanded. For a moment, he tried to play dumb, his eyes shifting away from mine. Money? What are you talking about, Jane? Don't play games with me, he said. I've been noticing for weeks. It's gone, and you're the only other person here, I insisted. Finally, he sighed, running a hand through his hair. Okay, I took it. But Jane, you don't understand. I needed it. Needed it for what, Alex? Beer? Because that's all. I see what you're doing these days. Sitting around drinking while I'm out working my ass off, I confronted him. He flinched at that, but anger quickly replaced the guilt in his eyes. I don't have to explain myself to you, Jane. It's not like I'm asking for much, just a little cash to get by. Get by? I was incredulous. While I'm juggling bills, trying to keep us afloat. That money wasn't yours to take, Alex. That's stealing. His face turned red, and he took a step towards me, his voice raising. Stealing, really, Jane? From my own wife? That's what you're going to call it? Yes, that's exactly what I'm calling it. I stood firm. Because that's what it is, Alex. You took something that wasn't yours without asking. What else would you call it? We stood there glaring at each other, the tension thick in the air. It felt like a chasm had opened up between us, one filled with betrayal and hurt. Before I could say anything else, his phone rang. He glanced at it and then stormed off into the other room, leaving me standing there, fuming and heartbroken. The next day, things went from bad to worse. Alex's mom called, and before I could even get a word in, she was ripping into me. Jane, you ungrateful little witch, how dare you accuse my son of stealing? Do you have any idea what you've done? I pressed the phone against my ear, her shrill voice making my head pound. Mrs. Thompson, he took money from me. What was I supposed to do? Just ignore it? That's exactly what you should have done. He's your husband, for God's sake. You're supposed to support each other, she retorted. Support doesn't mean turning a blind eye to problems, Mrs. Thompson. It means facing them together. But how can we do that when he's lying and taking money behind my back? I argued. You've always been too hard on him, Jane, always expecting too much. It's no wonder he felt he had to hide things from you, she huffed. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was like we were living in two different realities. Expecting too much? I'm working day and night to keep us going, and he— Enough, Jane. I won't hear another word against my son. You've made your bed, now lie in it, she interrupted. And with that, she hung up, leaving me staring at the phone in disbelief. This wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about trust, respect, and the realization that maybe, just maybe, I was in this fight all alone. Life had thrown its fair share of curveballs, but nothing hit harder than the day Lily fell sick. It wasn't just a sniffle or a cough. It was one of those moments that stops you dead in your tracks, forcing you to reassess everything. Lily's fever had spiked in the night, her little body racked with coughs that seemed to shake the very bed she lay in. I remember sitting beside her, a cool cloth in hand, trying to bring some relief. The next morning, with Lily still burning up, I knew we needed a doctor. Alex was sprawled on the couch, a can of beer already in hand. It was barely 9 a.m. Alex, Lily's sick, really sick. I need to take her to the doctor, I said, my voice strained with worry. He glanced up, irritation flashing across his face. So take her. What do you want me to do about it? I clenched my fists, fighting the urge to scream. Maybe act like a father. I can't do everything alone, Alex. He didn't answer, just turned his attention back to his phone, effectively ending the conversation. At the doctor's office, the news wasn't good. Lily needed medicine, maybe even a specialist. The cost started to pile up in my head, a mountain of expenses we were ill-prepared to handle. I called Alex from the pharmacy, hoping for some semblance of support. The medicine's expensive, Alex, and she might need more tests. We need to figure this out. There was a pause before he spoke, his voice cold. Well, what do you want me to do about it, Jane? Money doesn't grow on trees. I was stunned into silence. Our daughter was sick, and all he could think about was money. She's your daughter, Alex. She needs us. Can't you see that? Of course I see that, but freaking out about it isn't going to make money appear. You figure it out, you're good at that, he retorted before hanging up. I felt a mix of anger, frustration, and sheer determination. Lily needed me, and I wasn't about to let her down. The decision to not send money to Alex's mom that month was a tough one, but necessary. Lily's health came first, no matter what. But when Mrs. Thompson found out, the fury was unleashed. "Where's my money, Jane?" she demanded over the phone, her voice a sharp knife. I took a deep breath, bracing myself. Lily's sick. The money went to her medicine and doctor's visits. We had no choice. No choice? That's my money, Jane. You can't just decide not to send it. What am I supposed to do? She accused. Your granddaughter is sick, Mrs. Thompson. Doesn't that matter to you? Lily's health is more important right now, I pleaded. She scoffed, a sound that made my skin crawl. You're just using that as an excuse. I need that money, Jane. You're being selfish. The conversation went downhill from there, ending with her calling me names and hanging up. I stood there, phone in hand, feeling a cocktail of emotions swirling inside me. Anger, disbelief, but above all, a fierce protectiveness over Lily. The day everything turned on its head started like any other, but ended in a way I never could have predicted. It was when I stood at the checkout line, groceries piled up, that I reached for my bank card and found nothing but emptiness. Panic knotted my stomach, not just at the embarrassment of not being able to pay, but at the realization of what it meant. Alex had taken my card for a whole week. My calls to him went unanswered, a silence that spoke volumes. Then, out of the blue, he returned, but not alone. His mother was in tow, both of them wearing smug looks that didn't bode well. Before I could even demand answers, Alex dropped his bombshell. I won, Jane. $5 million. Can you believe it? The news knocked the wind out of me. Not just the amount, but the sheer audacity of him claiming this victory after everything. What? How? I managed to ask. With your card, he said, as if he had done something clever. Bought a lottery ticket. The room spun. He used my card without permission, and now this. His next words cut deeper than the betrayal of theft. I'm leaving you, Jane. This is my chance to start over without you dragging me down. Me and Mom, we're set. His mother, standing there with that twisted grin, twisted the knife. Told you, Jane. You never believed in my son. Now look at you, left behind while we move on to better things. I was speechless. The injustice of it all burned in my chest. You think you can just take that money and run? That's my card, my account. You stole from me, Alex. He shrugged, that infuriating indifference back in full force. Finders keepers, Jane. I won fair and square. It's time I found someone more supportive, someone who appreciates me. The words stung, but it was the dismissal of our life together, of our daughter, that hurt most. And what about Lily? You're abandoning your daughter. Lily will be fine with you. I need a fresh start, away from all this. He gestured vaguely around our home, as if it were a trap he had finally escaped. I wasn't just going to roll over and let him take everything from us. Especially not with money that was as much mine as it was his, if not more so. The first step was finding a lawyer, someone who could navigate the treacherous waters of legal battles that lay ahead. When I sat down across from Miss Rivera, a sharp woman with a reputation for being a bulldog in court, I knew I had found my champion. I'm not going to lie to you, Jane. This is going to be a tough fight, Miss Rivera began, her voice matter-of-fact. But it's not insurmountable. I nodded, clenching my fists in my lap to stop them from shaking. I understand, but I can't just let him get away with this. It's not right. She smiled, and there was a glint of something fierce in her eyes. I like your spirit. We'll give it everything we've got. First, we'll need to prove the purchase was made with your card. Do you have statements or any evidence of the transaction? Of course, I replied, pulling out copies of my bank statements I had brought with me. It's all here, the date, the time, the exact amount. Good, Miss Rivera said, taking the papers and scanning them quickly. This is a solid start. Next, we'll file for an injunction to freeze the winnings until the court makes a decision. It's going to make him and his mother very unhappy, but it's a necessary step. The thought of facing Alex and his mother again made my stomach churn, but the fire Miss Rivera had ignited in me burned brighter. Let them be unhappy. After everything they've done, it's the least they deserve. The day we served Alex with the papers, I saw him for the first time since he left. He looked different, harder, colder. His mother was with him, of course, her sneer as pronounced as ever. This is a mistake, Jane. You're going to lose, Alex said, his voice laced with a venom I hadn't heard before. I'm not the one who made a mistake, I shot back, my voice steady despite the trembling I felt inside. Stealing from your family, abandoning your daughter, that was all you. His mother stepped forward, her finger wagging in my face. You're a greedy, ungrateful little— Enough, Miss Rivera interjected, stepping between us with a calm authority that immediately silenced Alex's mother. This will be settled in court, not on your doorstep. After months of legal wrangling, the day of reconing finally arrived. I sat in the courtroom, a bundle of nerves, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. Across the room, Alex and his mother sat together, an air of smug confidence about them that made my skin crawl. They whispered to each other, casting occasional glances my way, their expressions a mix of disdain and superiority. My lawyer leaned over, her voice a whisper of steel. Ready for this, Jane? It's showtime. I nodded, not trusting my voice. My heart hammered in my chest, a loud echo in the silent room as we awaited the judge's entrance. When the judge finally entered, the room hushed to a solemn quiet, and the proceedings began, a blur of legal jargon and back and forth that felt both endless and fleeting. Alex's lawyer painted him as a wronged man, desperately trying to claw back some dignity from a life derailed. It was almost laughable if it wasn't so tragic. Then Miss Rivera stood, clearing her throat. Your Honor, let's not forget the facts. The lottery ticket, the source of this windfall, was purchased with stolen funds, my client's funds. This isn't a fairy tale windfall. It's the result of deceit, a betrayal of familial trust. The back and forth continued until the judge finally called for silence, ready to deliver the verdict. See? My heart stopped, every second stretching into eternity as we awaited his words. In light of the evidence presented, it is the decision of this court that the majority of the lottery winnings, being the result of a transaction made with funds not belonging to Mr. Alex Thompson, be awarded to Mrs. Jane Thompson, the judge announced, his voice carrying a weight that felt like a gavel to my soul. A wave of relief washed over me, so intense it left me dizzy. Beside me, Miss Rivera squeezed my hand, a victorious smile on her face. Across the room, Alex's face was a picture of shock, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. His mother's reaction was more vocal, a strangled gasp of indignation that echoed off the courtroom walls. This is robbery, pure and simple, she exclaimed, her voice shrill with disbelief. But her protests fell on deaf ears, the judge already moving on to finalize the proceedings. Months had rolled by since the dust settled on the courtroom floor, leaving me with a significant chunk of the winnings and a fresh start. I didn't waste any time dwelling on what could have been. Instead, I focused on the future, investing wisely in shares of a reputable company and securing a nest egg for Lily's education. She was going to have the opportunities I fought tooth and nail for, without the shadow of her father's mistakes looming over her. As for Alex and his mother, well, their story took the kind of turn you'd expect when too much money meets too little sense. He bought himself an outrageously expensive car, flaunting it like a trophy whenever he got the chance. But the flash and dazzle couldn't mask the inevitable. His gambling, which started as a small-time hobby, spiraled out of control, swallowing every last penny of his windfall. Last I heard, he was drowning in debt, the fancy car long gone, and living off whatever his mother scraped together from her pension. Their grandiose dreams deflated to the size of their cramped living quarters in his mother's old house, the two of them constantly at each other's throats. Alex never did get a job, pride and laziness anchoring him to his mother's couch as firmly as if he were cemented there. One afternoon, while Lily and I were at the park enjoying a peaceful, simple moment, Sarah, my steadfast friend through thick and thin, sidled up beside me on the bench. "Jane, you heard about Alex?" she asked, a note of pity in her voice that I didn't need. I nodded, keeping my eyes on Lily as she laughed, swinging higher and higher. "Yeah, heard he's hit rock bottom." Sarah shook her head. "It's a damn shame, isn't it? All that money and nothing to show for it." I sighed, a small part of me still aching for the man I once loved, for the father Lily deserved but didn't have. "It is a shame, but we're moving on, Sarah. We're happy." Our conversation drifted to lighter topics, but as I sat there basking in the late afternoon sun, my thoughts briefly wandered to Alex. I wondered if he ever thought about us, about the life he threw away for a shot at easy money. But then Lily called out, beckoning me to push her higher on the swing, and just like that, my fleeting curiosity about Alex's regrets vanished into the air.